Okay, so what kind of steps do companies need to go through to define the product value in a way that's super clear, super succinct, but effective at the same time?
Sure. Well, I think the first thing to understand is that the starting point is an orientation of the organization. So it's not just what do we need to do to get to define product value, and all of a sudden you have tangible product value. Unfortunately, it's never quite that simple. So the starting point really is the orientation inside the building, inside the organization, and the DNA of the organization. So is the organization or the company that you work for sales-led, marketing-led, product-led? Is it customer-focused, market-orientated, or in many cases is it internally focused in any of those kind of perspectives? Ultimately, what we really need to get to is a market-led, customer-focused orientation, which means that the state of mind for the organization, the perspective, the orientation, is an external one, not an internal one. And that's the starting point, right? Without that, actually, it becomes quite difficult, right? Okay. So if you're a sales-led organization, the metric by which your DNA is led by is an internal one. How much money are we going to make? How much money do we need to make? And that leaves aside the concerns, the perspectives for what happens outside the building, which is really, at the end of the day, all that matters. If you can build and fix for pains and gains outside the building, what happens inside the building, by and large, will look after itself. So number one, it's the orientation. The second part is the rigor, right? So trying to discover what the value is often doesn't come just like that, right? It requires patience, and time is the most precious commodity inside the building, inside the organization, not money. Most people think it's budget. Of course it's important, but more important is the time to do the work and get it right. Okay? So the second part is understanding what the rigor for discovery is, and going through the discovery process to try to define and identify, or should I say identify and define what is valuable. But then the next question is what is valuable to whom? So then identifying the target market. So there's a number of processes that you'll need hard skills to do that. So the ability to do segmentation, the ability to do competitive analysis from a market and from a product point of view, to size and measure that market, and then lead the conversation inside the building about who is our target market and make the right strategic decisions. That's one part. Often that doesn't happen in a robust way, right? Because these are all foundational things. So you segment, you target, you position, right? To do those three things, what we call the holy trinity of marketing, you need to be able to understand what the value is, why you win, etc., etc. And you can't do your positioning without understanding that in the first place. So there's a process, and understanding that process, it can be fairly linear. It should be fairly linear. And there's a rigor. So there's a cadence for doing it. So I think a lot of mistakes companies make is they think it's a one-off. Let's discover the value, let's do this research and this research, we'll find it, and then we'll just execute upon it. To some degree that's correct, but it's only a small piece of the pie. Really, what you want to be able to do is constantly talking to customers and prospects, understanding the segmentation, the landscape, and reviewing it on a regular basis, and having that cadence is really important. So a lot of product marketers ask me, how often should I review this thing, or this, targeting or segmentation, or how often should I refresh my personas? How often should I look at different segments to review whether we should target them and try to identify what the value is? And my answer is a simple one, but it often sort of just depends as well. And the most common answer to all questions I usually get is it just depends, because there's never a black and white answer, right? But the rule of thumb for me in a reasonably mature organization is once a year. So you need to have this rigor of, first of all, the discovery process takes a good 6 months, right? Again, time is the most precious commodity. So once you've been through the discovery process, you've identified certain things, you've tested, stress tested, let's say you've done alpha, you've done MVP, you've done prototyping, and you've tested it, and the validation has come back. So through the discovery process and the validation process, you've identified certain value that has some level of competitive advantage, and you've launched, and all being well, everything goes well and everything is well in the world, then you need to make sure that just be aware that is not the end of the process, it's just the beginning. Because of course, once you're in the market, the process of competitive response and the market dynamics trigger, and the vicious cycle kicks off, especially if you're successful. The more successful you are, the more the response will come back to you in cyclical terms. You need to have the cadence to be able to respond to that on a regular basis. And what I mean by that is every quarter you're doing a re-review. Every year you're doing a full re-diagnosis of the market to go back to say, what were the results? Were we successful? What could we have done better? Look at the measurement, look at the competition, etc., etc. That also means re-reviewing your segmentation, re-reviewing your personas, re-reviewing your positioning to make sure it's absolutely spot on. That's, of course, if the business has an annual planning cadence. Some businesses do it more frequently, right? But at the very minimum, it should be annual. So, two things in summary. First of all, make sure that your orientation of the company is correct and you're focused on what happens outside the building, because that will help what happens inside the building flow much easier. Second, make sure you have the cadence correct of all the right work that needs to be lined up to identify, but then the rigor to keep it fresh and the ability to keep coming back and reiterate and watching the market. So there's two steps within one there.
Okay, fantastic. And